So Bryan is here to really talk about, what are majors like and how is it fit for purpose with the understanding that jobs are changing, people are changing. My son who's 13, by the time he comes into college, his interests are going to be different, jobs are going to be different. And my daughter, who's going to go to college, probably will be done with college. She's probably going to come back to college at that stage, right? And the question is, how does a university continue to have a fit for purpose model as they move forward through the traditional as well as the other one? So, Bryan, I'm not going to take too much of your time. If you can present your Quiller, and I believe the audience should have it also. Um, there you go. I'm going to let you go, and then I'll be right back.
All right, that sounds great. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. It's a real privilege to be with all of you and to be part of this event. What immense value, from an inaugural event to have this group of people together. I know I've been learning a ton from it, and it's, like I said, just a real privilege to be able to present and to engage in this conversation with you all. Um, so, Matt mentioned I'm a faculty member in the psychology department at Colorado State University and also a co-founder of Jobsology. And Jobsology is sort of a spin-off of some research that we had done at Colorado State that's developing products designed to help foster a sense of purpose using the science of vocational psychology. And in setting up this story, I thought I'd start by just sharing a little bit about my own journey. Might give you some insight as to why I'm motivated to engage in this conversation, but also there are elements of the 19-year-old version of me that I think shows up frequently in the work that you do in higher education with students and learners. So I was one of these undergraduate students who was an eager student. I think I took my studies very seriously, and fortunately, I was surrounded by people who were in my corner. I had a lot of support, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And it wasn't that I was listless, heading in the wrong direction, didn't have, a lot of things going my way. It was just that I had broad interests, and the having to choose one path, if that meant not having to choose other paths, that scenario was just paralyzing to me in terms of my career decision making. So I don't know if I actually received letters from the registrar saying, Bryan, you're going to be a junior next year and we're not going to let you register for classes until you declare a major, but that might have happened. And so ultimately, I think what I recognize now in myself was, although I had very broad interests and I really did desire, to make some kind of positive impact in the world, I just didn't have a clear sense of purpose. I wanted to, I just didn't know what pathway would allow me to kind of optimize what makes me unique in a way that makes the world better somehow. And so, long story short, I ended up kind of defaulting into psychology because I had more credits in that than in other majors I was considering, and it was interesting enough. So I had a psych major. I decided, since I still didn't quite know what I wanted to do, I'd just go on to graduate school and keep my education going, knowing that would delay the decision of what I was going to do with my life. I ended up studying counseling psychology in a program at University of Minnesota that I discovered when I got there was well known for its contributions to research and theory and practice related to vocational psychology and career development. And as part of my path as a graduate student there, I worked in a clinic. We had a career assessment clinic with middle career adults. Many of them were objectively very successful, but subjectively totally miserable, hated their work, and a lot of them, unprompted by me, would say things like, I wish I had discovered my calling. I wish I had a clearer sense of purpose. And that spoke to me for a couple of reasons. One, I was still, even then, trying to get some clarity on my own sense of purpose, but it also helped me realize this is a really common problem. And it really kind of slows things down for folks. It disrupts things when they're not able to link to something that's really personally meaningful to them within their education, within their career. And so, at the time as a graduate student, I decided, hey, maybe I'll look at what psychological research, social science research has had to say about this topic. I conducted a lit review, lit search, found very, very few attempts to apply the methods of science to understand this. And that's when I had a bit of an aha moment. Maybe part of my calling is to apply these systematic methods of science to understand what it looks like and what difference it makes for people who approach their work with a sense of purpose as a calling. And so I started to do that, and I was fortunate to land a faculty job where I had the freedom to develop a network of collaborators. And it was really perfect timing, because I think with the advent of positive psychology, there was a real hunger and appetite to wrap our minds around what it looks like to experience work and education as purposeful. And so since that time, we've gone from fewer than 10 studies published in all of history related to a sense of calling or purpose at work, which was the case 15 years ago, to now more than 600 studies. So this new science of purposeful work has emerged and has become a global phenomenon. This is something that scholars from all over the world, at least pre-pandemic, would gather to share what they're learning and engage in this really exciting conversation. And so just a quick distillation of the basic method that we've used to investigate this question. If you're going to study something in psychology, you have to come up with a way to measure it. And so we've designed some scales that measure purposeful work, and then we administer those scales in many studies along with other scales that measure other things. And we use some, now with 600 plus studies, there are some very sophisticated longitudinal designs that have been used. But what it boils down to is that we've discovered students, learners, and workers who perceive a sense of purpose are more confident and satisfied, and they experience more meaning in their work and education than do students who lack a sense of purpose. And so sense of purpose within education and work is associated with a lot of career development benefits, but it's broader than that. When students think of their education and career as purposeful, they're happier and they experience life as a whole as having more meaning than do students who don't think of their education and careers that way. And for those of you who are really attuned to the quote-unquote harder outcomes, those types of attitudes we know from lots of other research, confidence, satisfaction with a major, with my educational experience, meaning in the process, those kinds of attitudinal outcomes, we'll call those intermediate outcomes, are themselves linked to those harder target outcomes like GPA or performance within a person's education, as well as persistence toward the degree, so retention and graduation rates, and then success in the job search process. So to me, this emerging new science of purposeful work is this kind of validation that a sense of purpose is really essential. It's not the only pathway towards success, but it's a key linchpin. Once a student is able to identify what my sense of purpose is, where all this is leading, and how that matters to me in a personal way, that really drives a lot of key outcomes. And so then that begs the question, what should we be after? What kinds of things can we do within higher education to foster a sense of purpose among students? And there's a bigger conversation around this with more bullet points than we have time for in this presentation, but I'm going to highlight 3. The first one is fit. So that people are unique, and there's this long history within vocational psychology studying individual differences. People are unique. I like to use the word gifts, but when I use that word gifts, I don't mean giftedness. I just mean what differentiates people, what makes them unique in terms of their quote-unquote work personalities. Well, it's things like vocational interests, it's things like work values, personality traits, workplace culture preferences, these kinds of things. Each person has a unique constellation of attributes that can be reliably assessed. So part of it is helping students, learners understand what makes them unique, but then also evaluate how the ways in which they're unique maps onto pathways that are available to them in the world of work. So it's this notion of fit, right? To the extent to which a person's psychological profile aligns with the training programs that they're in, the career paths that they're pursuing, the better the outcomes for that people. It's an important predictor. So fit is key. The second bullet here is integration. So instead of segmenting one's education and career away from the rest of life, if we're talking about purpose, we have to bring those things together. We have to integrate those things, which means engaging students in a process where they're able to identify connections between what they're studying and what they're aspiring to and a broader sense of purpose in life as a whole. And when people experience that kind of integration between, what Crystal Park, a social psychologist at UConn, refers to as a global meaning system, when a person's global meaning system aligns with their experience of their education and their career development, then really good outcomes result. And then the last piece of this that I'll highlight now is the importance of engaging in this process within a community of support. This kind of discerning a sense of purpose and then seeking ways to live it out, it's a process that doesn't work as well in a vacuum. And so creating experiences for students to leverage their support network, to lean on not only encouragement, but modeling, guidance from role models, mentoring relationships, those kinds of things play a really essential role in the development of a sense of purpose. And so if those are the goals, what are some tools or strategies we can use to pursue those goals? Well, in terms of evaluating what makes me unique and looking at ways to discern a sense of fit, there are a number of tools involving assessments related to this. Psychological assessment, that's not the only way to achieve this. There are guided self-exploration activities that can be useful. But if you're looking for efficiency, if you're looking for digital tools that can help facilitate this, there are a number of high-quality platforms, and I'm partial to one of them because that's part of what we've developed with Pathway U, but it allows a learner to assess themselves efficiently and then reflect on that information and use it to drive decision making. My one caveat here would be to say, if you want to pursue making these types of resources available, you have to enlist the help from somebody who understands reliability and validity. It's absolutely essential if you're giving people information about themselves and then asking them to use that to drive decision making. It's got to be accurate information. And so there are many, many assessments that haven't leaned on best practices in terms of how they're developed and evaluated, and a number of them that have, and I would just steer you toward those tools and resources that are able to demonstrate evidence that they meet high standards for reliability and validity. The second bullet here is promoting active engagement on the part of students through evidence-based activities, things that we know work based on research on career interventions. And when I say career interventions here, I don't mean interventions like the show intervention. I mean any kind of career counseling activity, whether that's one-on-one career counseling or a structured group intervention or a classroom-based or an online intervention. There are now decades of research within career development that has experimentally tested these types of interventions. And in fact, there are now meta-analyses, that is studies of these studies, that are really important in looking over a whole body of research and then distilling what are the key takeaways, those critical ingredients that we know we need to include if we're creating these kinds of opportunities for learners. And so I'll just give you one quick example. Steve Brown and colleagues at Loyola University Chicago conducted one of these meta-analyses, combing the research literature to find every experimental test they could of a career intervention. And they looked at these overall effects across all those studies and were interested in two questions. The first one is, do these kinds of interventions actually work? Do they help? That is, do people with career development needs and concerns, are they better off because they've participated in these types of interventions than people with similar concerns who don't? And then the other question they were interested in is, if it is in fact the case that these interventions do work, and if some work better than others, what differentiates those super effective, very impactful interventions from the ones that don't work as well? And so the answer to that first question that they discovered was absolutely. Students, learners with career development needs who participate in these kinds of interventions do have better outcomes than people with similar needs who do whatever it is they would do on their own. But there also are some critical ingredients, some evidence-based practices that we know are linked to really good outcomes. And there's a wide range of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'll just mention a couple because they're on the screen here. Expressive writing exercises, especially those that involve setting SMART goals. I mean, we know the importance of setting goals for people in terms of their career development. It's a phenomenon where if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. But when you're asked to think through goals and then write them down, there's something about the act of writing them down that kind of increases their impact and effectiveness. Part of it, I think, is taking these vague ideas bouncing around in a student's mind and being kind of asked to distill them, put language to them, which you have to do when you write them out. And then part of it is the act of putting things in writing creates a kind of psychological contract of a learner with herself or himself. And so that's one example. And then the other is, having access to accurate occupational information. And there are lots of different sources, including online, of accurate occupational information, but establishing a network where you're able to talk with people who are doing the kind of work that you aspire to do is a powerful way to do that as well. An informational interview where you get up-to-date information from people in the trenches with also some modeling and some advice. So those are some very straightforward, specific things that I think ought to be part of what an institution of higher learning should make available for students. The third bullet here is building support. And this speaks again to that need to create opportunities for students to leverage the support and mentoring from other people in a really straightforward way that I usually advise thinking through this with students is, look, companies have boards of directors, right? If you're involved in a company, you've got a board, and members of that board often are selected because they have special expertise and can provide special guidance. So what does it look like for a student to establish their own personal board of directors where you select, say, 3 to 5 people who you look up to, who have your best interests at heart, who can serve as mentors, who don't have an agenda for you? And just make sure it's more than one person. Have multiple people so that you get different perspectives and then can look at how those different perspectives converge. There's a lot of wisdom often in those points of convergence. So if you're engaging in these kinds of activities as a learner, then that question of what is my purpose for my education, for my career, active engagement in these types of activities usually helps an answer to that question about purpose start to emerge. It starts to kind of bubble to the top and clarity starts to set in. Now, Alex mentioned, the future of work, the changing world of work, the changing environment of education. And, obviously the pandemic has hastened some of the changes that we already saw brewing. So, long gone are the days where there's a loyal employer who will shepherd you through your career path until you collect a pension. Now a different kind of labor agreement and the rise of the gig economy. I mean, students, learners have to learn to be free agents. That's one change. the Internet of Things, and every job turning into a tech job. That's a big change. The rise of automation and the concern that robots are coming to displace all of us. That's a big change. I think for students to survive in the future world of work, the types of competencies that are required um, is led by the ability to adapt, to be nimble, to roll with changes, and a sense of purpose. I think is so essential in terms of a person's educational and career development, because a sense of purpose transcends any specific job title, and it provides coherence. Like, if there's anything that we can count on, it's that change is not going to be the exception. It's going to be the rule. It already is. And so for somebody to experience purpose in their work, knowing that change is inevitable and that they'll have to be nimble and adapt to it, being able to link to a broader sense of purpose that transcends any particular job title is going to be just a huge resource for learners and students as they navigate this changing world of work. So I'm looking at the time. It's 24 minutes past the hour. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions. Matt, you're muted. There you go.
There you go. Now I'm mute. I was on mute. Thanks so much. We are pretty systematic in the way we do this. So you hit it right on the time. I think our warnings and chimes. So the statement you made, if you don't know where you're going, you won't end up. You may end up somewhere else. That should be a motto for me. If I didn't know where I was going and I ended up in higher ed. So think about that. There's probably a handful of people that are in the same boat as I am. No one walks in and says, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to go work in a higher ed, especially in the back offices and things like that. But, you brought a lot of great topics around this. You brought a lot of research, which I think is really important. So one of the things that we're noticing as we speak to schools, I'll be honest, prior to the pandemic and my discussions after the pandemic are different in terms of buy-in to a shift, right? Before the pre-pandemic, it was, we're going to do an academic curriculum. This is what we stand for. This is what it is. As soon as the pandemic hit, and now they're looking at, hey, people can learn remotely. People can want a shorter time frame in education. Now you have continuing ed becoming a bigger part. You have community colleges becoming a bigger part. You're now starting to question the programs in there. What do you say to schools that are now about to think about the shift? What are the things that they should be thinking about to allow for that, I would say a pivot, because I still think there's still a traditional path that I think everyone should still stay on. But I believe there is a greater opportunity to expand offerings. What are the advice you would give to the folks that are listening in at colleges, say, you know what, we need to build a little bit more beyond traditional? And then how do I use this passion profile model to bring them to a fit for purpose career path?
I think my advice would be, obviously, if you don't adapt and change as an institution, you're going to get left behind. I mean, that much is clear and obvious. But it's not an either or. It's not, should we change who we are in order to adapt? There is a way to do it thoughtfully where you retain what's most distinctive and important to you as an institution while innovating and thinking through new ways to deliver these things. Right? And so, a lot of that means seeking input from the key stakeholders, but a lot of it also means being willing to take risks and just building in some opportunities to pause and then evaluate. Are we innovating in the right ways and in a way that still allows us to retain what's most distinctive to our own identity, whatever that looks like for that type of institution? And from the perspective of purpose, to me, I'm biased because I've built my whole career around understanding this, right? If your focus is on helping learners and students understand what's purposeful to them, how does what matters most to them in life influence the steps that they take along the way, you realize that there's not just one way to accomplish that goal, right? There are multiple ways to accomplish that goal while retaining what's most distinctive about the institution's identity and honoring that objective that a student has to make this matter to me, not just make me career ready, not just increase my earning potential, but to be something that helps me live an integrated life. And then there's a lot of objectives that fall underneath that goal, but if I had to distill it into, like a 30-second response, I probably already exceeded 30 seconds, but that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I fell into my passion, right? Higher ed wasn't my passion. I fell into it. But I think what I recognize, even when I did pick my criminal justice major, I recognized what I was passionate about. I liked reading stories. I liked understanding history of something. I wanted to see what the implications were. Like all these things were like elements of how I now apply everything here. That's why I'm really passionate about, let's look at what happened the last 8 years and make sure we don't do that the next 8 years, right? That's where I come with that. Any
And
guidance? Good.
I was just going to say, I'm so glad you shared that, Matt, because that is actually an example. You're studying criminal justice as an undergraduate with these objectives, but those purposes that you just laid out, I'm willing to bet are exactly what you're pursuing now in a very different way, in a different, from a different angle. So it provides coherence to what might feel to some like a disjointed path, right?
Yeah, and and if you've been here since yesterday, I talked about my daughter applying to college, and she's asking me what major to pick, and I'm like, hey, pick a major that you want to go to class and learn.
Yeah.
Right. Don't default your major, to because you like to learn about something. Don't default it. Like I like criminal justice. I didn't default it into my career.
Right.
I designed student systems. I've never coded a software in my life, yet I could design most systems right now. Bryan, we could probably have many more of these discussions. I want to say thanks again for the time and the insight.